Hi, I'm Scott Rogers, founder and director of the University of Miami School of Law's Mindfulness and Law program, and I'm delighted to have this opportunity to introduce you to mindfulness and its connection to the practice of law. And I think it's especially interesting and important that the Florida Bar and the Florida Bar Journal has devoted an issue to mindfulness, which speaks to the importance of this area to our lives as lawyers and judges and members of the legal profession, personally and professionally. And over the course of this one CLE credit program, I'm interested in introducing you to mindfulness, to its connection to the practice of law, to understanding what mindfulness is and also what mindfulness is not, as well as to share with you exercises that you can practice and tips for bringing mindfulness into your busy day and into your lives. Whether or not this is your introduction to mindfulness and its connection to the practice of law, the term is probably not entirely unfamiliar to you. It has, of course, been making its way into the public discourse for a while, and it is a term and a practice that goes back thousands of years. And as you learn more about mindfulness, you'll realize the threads that run through a great many spiritual, religious, and contemplative traditions. Qualities such as paying attention, of having a connectedness and a present moment awareness to what's taking place around us, so that we can more fully not only be here for this life as we're living it, to participate more meaningfully in this life, but contribute in very meaningful and important ways that draw upon our skills and our instincts and our intuition and our expertise. But why is the law now taking special note of mindfulness? And so there's a variety of things I'd like to share with you that touch on this to both inform you and perhaps inspire you to learn more about this. The Florida Bar Journal article is, of course, one instance of mindfulness playing a significant role in the landscape of the law, but there have been other articles here and there that have been written on mindfulness. There are law review articles that connect mindfulness to mediation and mindfulness to trial practice, mindfulness to negotiation, mindfulness to decision making and ethics. You'll find that there's a lot of law review articles, and have been now for maybe upwards to 20 years, talking about and connecting mindfulness to the life of the lawyer and of the judge. The legal profession is a challenging one. It's very stressful, it's depleting, and so not surprisingly, it has been the case for a very long time, but maybe now more than ever, or at least we're taking greater note of this. Issues of anxiety, of depression, of suicide, of thoughts of suicide are very real and important concerns in the legal profession, both at the level of legal education and the profession at large. In addition to that, the quality of our relationships with others and the ways in which they can be challenged by the work that we do, and in particular, as we'll touch on, the way we relate to the work that we do, the way that we relate to the people with whom we're interacting in these sometimes hostile and aggressive environments. They can weigh on us, and our appreciation not only for the work that we do and the ways in which it can affect and impact our health and well-being, and it can and does, as well as our relationships, but also the work that we do in general. We're very talented, we're very educated, we have a great deal to offer, and most of us, if not all of us, went into the law because we found something in it very exciting, and yet over time, a long time or a short period of time, something can dampen in that regard. There's a weightiness to it that can overwhelm at times, and many lawyers find themselves unhappy in the practice of law, with misgivings about the practice of law, and or not performing at the level at which they would find themselves capable. And of course, if we could shift that, if we could begin to find more of that early excitement in the law and bring it into our lives, what might change in terms of our motivation, in terms of our intellectual engagement, in terms of our health and our well-being, and those around us. And this is some of what it is that mindfulness offers us in a very interesting and important way, because it's not necessarily what you think it is, and we'll touch on that in a little bit. So not surprisingly, we are finding mindfulness to be a part of conferences, American Bar Association conferences, the Florida Bar conferences that have been taking place now for a good number of years, as well as state bar conferences and events across the country and internationally, as well as becoming a meaningful part of law schools around the country in the ways that they are introducing mindfulness to students. And at the University of Miami School of Law, where I'm privileged and honored to work, we have a Mindfulness and Law program where we introduce mindfulness to students throughout their legal education with courses that are part of the curriculum, courses like Mindful Ethics and Mindfulness and Law and Mindful Leadership, as well as a general introduction to mindfulness. And this is something that is taking place across the country. So the science of mindfulness, which I'll touch on in a little bit, is perhaps animating and informing the legal profession, because the benefits of mindfulness to our health emotionally, physically, mentally, is becoming increasingly realized and well-founded. And so perhaps now, no more than any other time in history, it is so important to have another tool, another way of bringing ourselves more fully into the work that we're doing so that we can do it with a larger measure of enjoyment, engagement, and a contribution to making this world a better place. So what is mindfulness? I'm going to share with you in a few moments a definition of mindfulness that's a very popular one and I think a very helpful one. But I do so cautiously because I don't wish to have some definition of mindfulness way too heavy on your own coming to know and appreciate what it is to practice mindfulness and to really live a mindful life. But I think it can be helpful. We are lawyers. We like definitions. We like terms. They're helpful, but in many ways this is a pointer. It's pointing us in a direction for us to explore for ourselves through, among other things, the practice of mindfulness. Also, at the same time, there's nothing special about mindfulness, really. It's really very much in the service of us being more fully present for our lives. And of course, we're already here. We're already present for our lives and for the work that we're doing and for the people with whom we're interacting. And so mindfulness isn't adding something, and this is important because the exercises, the practices, the ways of attending and noting what's taking place isn't meant to be something in addition to everything that we're already doing. Rather, perhaps it is a way of shedding some of that which layers on unnecessarily and can get in the way of that larger aspect of our lives and living it fully or more fully with a larger embrace and a courageous engagement in what's taking place moment by moment. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about what mindfulness is, but not without reminding you at the very outset or pointing out that you already are living a mindful life from time to time. And have. And you know it. You know it when you're focused. You know it when you're attentive. You know it when you're really listening to somebody and you're connecting in a way and something meaningful is happening. You know it, I'll even suggest, when you have aha moments of creative bursts of insight and realizations that can be helpful to you in the decisions that you make at work, at home, and wherever you may find yourself. You know it when you're able to be at ease or a little bit more at ease in the midst of challenging situations that are arising, when those around you are finding themselves overwhelmed and frustrated, and something inside of you, however it is that it arises, from time to time or perhaps often, is able to be the one who stays steady in the midst of all that. Not that you're oblivious to what's taking place or that you don't care. You care quite a bit. You're very aware, but there's something about the way that you're relating to that experience that has you different in the midst of that experience. And so you know those moments where you've really been and where you continue to be present and attentive and engaged and compassionate and wise. And mindfulness and the practice of mindfulness really is intended to help reorient us or continue to orient us in that direction that we already know and continue to live again and again and again. But this is a challenging world. This is a tricky profession. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of things that can overwhelm us. And we live at a time when our culture very much sort of is in the service of this. And we have distracting devices, and we have a lot of things going on, and a lot of things that we can turn our attention to, and a lot of things that are more interesting and or exciting than that which we have in front of us as the task to do. And so these can challenge us in our efforts to really be present and attentive. And so mindfulness is, perhaps when all is said and done, about being here, not needing to go somewhere else unless that's appropriate and called for, being able to bear and attend to what's arising, even if it's unpleasant or unwanted or undesirable, while maintaining a quality of wisdom and compassion that's helpful to ourselves and others. And so with that set out as a foundation for what this is all about, and perhaps you can already realize the ways that can be helpful and meaningful to you in your life personally and in the work that you do, here is a definition offered by one of the great leaders of mindfulness in the West, Jon Kabat-Zinn, who developed a program called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction in the late 70s that has proven itself to be one of the most robust ways in which mindfulness is shared over the course of 8 weeks, and also for which there has been an enormous amount of medical and scientific research to support its efficacy in the areas that I spoke to earlier of mental and emotional, cognitive health and well-being, physical health and well-being. And so he says, mindfulness is paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, to what's taking place in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. And so let's just break that down for a moment. It's paying attention, and we're always paying attention, in a particular way. So we'll explore what that particular way or those particular ways are. And you may find for yourself the particular ways that are especially resonant for you. So it's paying attention in a particular way. Now, what is that particular way, or how is it represented? On purpose. Okay, so you might think about how you go through much of your life, much of your day, where you're just sort of caught in the midst of things. Sometimes it's going terrific, sometimes it's not going so terrific, but it's not necessarily on purpose, this paying attention. It's just sort of happening. You're being pulled in different directions and you're going, sometimes unaware. And so mindfulness is paying attention on purpose, but to what? Because you can pay attention to so many things. To that which is taking place now, in the present moment. The person that you're talking to or who's talking to you, the material that you're reading so you can learn more information about whatever it is that you're exploring, to the happenings in your midst, wherever you may be, what's happening in the present moment. And then there's this lovely piece, non-judgmentally. And mindfulness is oftentimes referred to as non-judgmental awareness. This is, of course, an interesting area to share with judges. You know, whoa, non-judgmental awareness, but I'm a judge. And it's not speaking to the discerning quality of critical assessment and judgment, but rather the ways in which we develop an aversion to people and situations because they're not doing what we want them to do, and we become emotionally agitated in the face of it. And so it's that non-judgmental piece that allows us to take it as it is. It may be something that's not helpful. It may be something that shouldn't be a part of legal memorandum that's being prepared or an argument that's being advanced. But there's a non-judgmental, non-aversive quality to our experiencing of it so that we can say and do whatever we need to say and do that's helpful to the cause, as opposed to in some ways resisting what's taking place because we don't like it. So it's being more responsive to what's taking place and what's called for moment by moment. And you know those times when somebody has said to you, what you have done or what you've written or an idea that you've had isn't helpful, and you know ways that that's been articulated that have not been effective or persuasive. And you know those times when it has been articulated and advanced in a way that is helpful and persuasive. And I would suggest to you, whether you're on the receiving end of it or whether you're delivering it, if it's non-judgmental, it's just as, and perhaps even more, focused, important, and readily received and acted upon. So mindfulness is paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, to what's taking place in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. And so we'll explore that a little bit more in the next section, and also practice exercises that really do have us zeroing in on paying attention in that way. But also, I think it's important to share with you what mindfulness is not, or perhaps better said, what mindfulness is not in terms of its primary objective. Mindfulness is not about relaxing Mindfulness is not about reducing stress. Mindfulness is not about sort of calming down. Now, it is true that a great deal of research demonstrates and points us in the direction of the ways in which mindfulness is helpful to us feeling less overwhelmed, less stressed, of feeling calmer and finding a way to be a little bit more relaxed, notwithstanding what's taking place, or to be able to remove ourselves so that we can, in fact, move into a state of greater ease and calm. But that's not the primary objective, if there's an objective or aspiration of mindfulness. And it's important to note that, because if you want to learn some exercises, breathing exercises or progressive muscle exercise, relaxation exercises that can be in the service of calming down, and I highly recommend them and I practice them myself, those might be helpful, maybe even more helpful for finding a quick form of relief and calming down in the face of high stress, anxiety, overwhelm. Mindfulness, though, is in the service not of feeling better, but being more aware of what we're feeling, not of trying to change what's taking place so that we can feel better, but through being aware of what we're feeling and sensing and noticing, being able to take action when it's called for, to move things along in a productive and wise way, or not taking action, because so often action is not needed, or it's not needed in the ways that we think or we're impelled to take action. And so it's in the service not of feeling better, but of allowing the moment to be as it is, so that we can then figure out from a place of greater stability and clarity what, if anything, to do next. And so in our conversation, as it progresses, I'll touch again a little bit more on that. And perhaps when we get to the point where we're doing an exercise, it'll become especially clear that if we're doing a mindfulness exercise to calm down, and you're in the midst of a lot of emotional tumult, and you're trying to calm down, and you're checking in every few moments, is it working, is it working? That will only be potentially a source of greater frustration, because what we want to have become different isn't happening or isn't happening fast enough. But what if we release that as the objective? If instead of trying to change something, we want to experience what's taking place and be able to bear and be present for what's taking place, notwithstanding how tumultuous or chaotic it might be, from a place of greater ease and perspective, now something extraordinary might flow out of that. And that's very much what mindfulness is about. And that reminds me of a phrase that is oftentimes attributed to Jon Kabat-Zinn. I suspect it's been around for a long time. It's that you can't change the waves, but you can learn to surf, right? So that if you're in the waves of hecticness and chaos and tumult, and you're trying to change those waves to feel better, you're just going to be resisting what's taking place, and you're just going to be knocked down again and again and again. But what if, without needing to change anything, you develop the skillful way of riding that wave and those waves? Now, nothing around you has changed, but something inside of you has developed to allow you to more meaningfully and skillfully participate in whatever comes along moment by moment by moment. So we're going to take our discussion of mindfulness one step further. And I think that the concept of the attractive nuisance, or the attractive nuisance doctrine, might be helpful in this regard. And in particular, I'm thinking about the cases from a long time ago where young boys on a really hot day are out in some open terrain or field where they see this body of water that looks very inviting, and they jump in and perish because sadly it's toxic. And of course there's some interesting questions that we explore in law school of whether the landlord's responsible for not having enough protection or signage, or whether the boys were trespassing. But when all is said and done, one of the larger lessons is that there was something very inviting, something very attractive about that body of water, notwithstanding the fact that it wasn't serving anyone's interest and certainly didn't serve their interest to engage in it, to indulge in it. But understandable that they did. Understandable that they did. And so when Jon Kabat-Zinn, in his definition of mindfulness, talks about mindfulness as paying attention in a particular way on purpose to what's taking place in the present moment, well, what's oftentimes taking place in the present moment? One of the things that's taking place is the activity of our mind. That is, we're having thoughts. And the thoughts that we have, and I'll just let you ponder this for a moment, where have your thoughts been over the course of the last few moments, if not engaged in what I'm saying? That is, if you took flight, if the thoughts took flight, where did they go? And of course, this is an important question because this happens all day long. Where is our mind? And do we know where our mind is? And this is a very serious question. It might well be that if you reflect on the last few moments, you realize that your mind went into the past, thinking about something that took place earlier today or in some days or weeks or years past, or moving into the future, thinking about what's yet to come. And oftentimes, this is something that just happens without us driving, if you will, the train of thought. The mind is just moving around. And so, although we place our attention on a person or on an object to get a task or a project done, whatever that may be, the mind takes off. And it oftentimes spends its time in the past or in the future. And the past is often occasioned by what? Take a moment and think. When your mind is moving into the past, thinking about something that happened earlier in the day, something that happened 20 years ago, what does it tend to inspire? Oftentimes it's regret, it's doubt, it's guilt, it's misgivings, it's going back to something over and over again as if somehow something's going to change by doing so, or we're going to feel better by just continuing to go back to it. Or when the mind moves into the future, we're usually oftentimes thinking about something that we're worried about or concerned about, or we need to or want to have come out a certain way, a test result, the outcome of a hearing, whether or not we're going to get news, that's what we want. And it's occasioned by anxiety and feelings of worry. And so this mind, as it moves around, oftentimes brings us into places that are uncomfortable, unsatisfying, unhelpful, and not particularly useful. Now, that's not to say we can't learn from the past, and it doesn't mean that we can't plan for and anticipate the future. Surely we can, but that perhaps is best done in a more deliberate, emotionally steady, and focused way. And when the mind is flitting about, it tends not to be with us being in a focused, attentive, steady demeanor. Rather, it's flitting about in a very sort of haphazard way, and yet it changes our mood, it changes the quality of our focus and of our ability to pay attention. And so very much like the attractive nuisance, the mind is moving about to places that it's drawn to, but that isn't necessarily useful, helpful, and might even be counterproductive and bring us into a state of mind and mood and body. And we all know those moments. So mindfulness is very much recognizing that this mind wanders. That's its nature. And the mindfulness practice, and this is very important, it may be one of the most important things I share with you, is not about stopping the mind from wandering. We're not going to do an exercise in a little bit to shut down the thoughts, to block the thoughts. On the one hand, that would be rather impossible, I think, the science reveals, and you probably know from your own experience. But even more, it would be a very frustrating proposition, because you would continually be trying to create a reality, and reality wasn't playing along. So mindfulness is not about stopping the thoughts or blocking the thoughts or changing the thoughts. Rather, it's about being aware of the thoughts that are arising moment by moment. But rather than being pulled by them in all these sorts of directions and having our mood affected by them, it's the ability to hold steady. And just like clouds will continually be formed and will continually pass across the sky, and they might be foreboding and threatening, and they might be, light and fluffy, so too the thoughts and the activity of the mind and body is very much of that nature. And just as we can watch and be attentive to the weather patterns as they come and as they go, because that is their nature, they don't just come, they go, so too we can be attentive to the weather patterns of our own inner nature. And mindfulness is a skill set, or includes a skill set that allows us to do that, so that anger can arise, a thought can arise, and we're aware that it's arising without having to so quickly do something about it. And if we can hold steady during those moments, and we can, though it's not something that we're used to doing because we're so used to the quick fix of doing something to stop that person from talking or feeling better or satisfying this impulse or urge, if we do that, what tends to happen is the thought, the impulse, the feeling, it comes like that wave, it crests and it subsides. And that's when we have a greater capacity, if we can hold steady during that process, which doesn't usually take that long, to then decide what to do and how to do it. And so, mindfulness is very much about noticing the activity of the wandering mind and respecting that this is the nature of our mind without needing it to change for us to be more effective and to feel more engaged, notwithstanding. And so there's interesting research that came out of Harvard by psychologists Gilbert and Killingsworth that looked at just how often does the mind wander. And there's also some other interesting research where psychologists are exploring how many thoughts do we have during the course of a day. So take a moment and think, how many thoughts do you think you have or the typical person has during the course of a typical day? And the psychologists suggest maybe 50, 60, 70,000 thoughts. And on top of that, many of those thoughts we had yesterday and the day before, right? Person cuts you off in traffic and you've got this whole series of dramatic thoughts and reactions, and it's the same every single time. And it clutters things up, it gets in the way, it changes our mood, it changes our attitude. And so we have a great many thoughts coming through the mind. This mind is a thinking machine. That is it, that's its job. They found in the research that when people were queried throughout the day, are you on task or off task? Are you on task now, doing that which you intended and set out to do, or are you somewhere else? Did your mind start wandering away? They find that people are off task about 46% of the time. Almost half of the day, we're somewhere else, right? Remember, mindfulness, paying attention on purpose to what's taking place, right, in the present moment. And here we're finding that about half the time, we're somewhere else. And as you might imagine, so often we're not aware that we're somewhere else. So not only are we not doing that which we set out to do, but we're not even aware that we're elsewhere. And so you know this when you've been reading a book and you realize, wait, where am I? You know, can you go back and realize after the last 2 or 3 pages you haven't even been paying attention, even though you've been turning the pages. Their research also inquired, and what is your mood right now? So in addition to finding whether they're on task or off task, they assessed the level of their mood, the quality of their mood. And what do you think they found? What do you think they found as between when people were on task versus off task in terms of their mood? They found that their mood was lower when they were off task. And so the way that research, and it was published in one of the most important scientific journals that we have, was articulated was a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. A wandering mind is an unhappy mind. And so as you might imagine, a focused mind is a more, I would suggest, engaged, motivated, right, spirited, alive, attentive, accomplished, right, mind. And so the mindfulness practice, and I'll share one with you shortly. I'll share 2 with you, in fact. I'll share one which is a practice which is a fundamental mindfulness sitting practice that you can do for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. And the other I'll share with you is called the learned hand exercise, and it's a shorter exercise that you can do anytime during the day over the course of less than even a minute. These exercises and these practices are very much in the service of being able to notice when the mind is wandering so that we can do something, which is to bring our attention back. That is, when we lose focus, we reclaim focus. But of course, to be able to do that, you have to realize that you've lost focus in the first place. And so as you'll see through these exercises, we're paying attention in a particular way. We're paying attention on purpose to what's taking place in the present moment, sort of anchored in the present moment, so that when we veer off, we realize it perhaps because it's our intention to stay present, and we can then do something about it if we choose, which would be bringing our attention back again and again and again. And the science supports that something is changing as it relates to the structure and function of our brain through this exercise, through this practice. And I can't help but think, and it's very commonly spoken of, a wonderful quote by William James, the gifted philosopher and psychologist of the early part of the 20th century, who said, "The faculty of bringing a wandering attention back again and again and again is the very root of judgment, character, and will." Right? The faculty, right? This is a skill. This is a capacity that we have of bringing a wandering attention back. It wanders away and we bring it back. And he didn't just say like once, he said again and again and again. So he got that this mind wanders and that this is not the easiest of enterprises. This is not for the faint of heart, this mindfulness practice. It's for the courageous, it's for the attentive, it's for those of us who, well, it's for all of us, but it brings about and it's in the service of something very important. He said again and again and again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. And in the context of the law, what attributes, what qualities could be more important than judgment, character, and will? So I'm cutting into my own presentation. Why am I doing this? Because it's been a lot of talking about. It's been a lot of thinking about. It's been an intellectual exploration, and yet this mindfulness is an experiential practice. So at the end of this program, we're going to do a couple of mindfulness exercises, but why wait until the end to have a taste of what it is that we're talking about? And so whether you're standing, whether you're sitting, whether you're laying down, whatever it is, take a moment and realize, notice your posture as you breathe. And perhaps notice how a few moments ago, notwithstanding that you had the same posture you have now, you weren't aware of it, and now you are. And how you're bringing more of an interior attentiveness to play. The breath, this breath, to be aware of this breath as it flows in and out. And if you're having thoughts in this moment about doing just that, were you aware that the thoughts were arising? Or were you just having those thoughts? Because mindfulness is very much about shifting our relationship so that we're aware of what's arising as opposed to so identified or caught in what's arising. Because the thoughts we have can be hugely helpful and informative, but they're not facts, and oftentimes they can lead us astray. And then whether you're sitting or standing or laying down or whatever position you're in, allow your attention to rest for a few breaths on the sensations of breathing. You're following the breath. Without an agenda. How often do we do that in this world? In a little bit, when we do a mindfulness exercise proper, we'll build on what it is that we've just explored over the course of the last few moments. As our technologies are developing in the areas of science and medicine, we're able to peer more directly into the activity of the brain and of the body and of the structural aspects of brain and body. And much of the research that's looking at mindfulness is looking at the ways in which mindfulness is associated with changes to the structure and function of our brain, as well as improvements or benefits to our body proper. So I want to take a few moments and share some of this with you because it really is a motivating force for many in turning their attention to mindfulness and sticking with it when it might, in many ways, be not the easiest thing to do, because we realize that something rather significant is taking place. Much like going to the gym and exercising today, we realize is, of course, hugely beneficial, or getting out and exercising is hugely beneficial to our health, cognitively and physically. We're realizing that the practice of mindfulness has perhaps the most extraordinary benefits to the structure and function of our neuroanatomy, as well as of our body and our health and well-being. And so I want to share with you some of the research that's come out over the last decade or so, and also encourage you, if you find that of interest, to read more about it on your own. But very importantly, just to the point where it motivates you and inspires you to practice, because you realize that you're the best judge for yourself of how this practice will meaningfully influence your life personally and professionally. No amount of science that's talked about, no personal anecdotes of what it's done for me or anybody else really matters as much as your own direct knowing. So I share this science with you, and I encourage you to learn more about it, as well as mindfulness in general, so that it helps inspire you to practice. And as I'll talk about in a little bit, it's the practice which is where the magic in many ways happens. And as I've spoken to, the magic is really just our ordinary nature coming into a fuller form. And so Sarah Lazar in 2005 at Harvard did a very important groundbreaking study where she looked at people who've been practicing mindfulness and how it is that the structure of their brain may have changed over the course of time. And she found a variety of things, two of which I want to share with you because a lot of other research has supported and reinforced and elaborated on these findings. So for example, she found that areas of the prefrontal cortex were thicker as a result of practicing mindfulness, and that the age-related thinning of the cortex that happens as we get older was attenuated. That is to say that those who were practicing had less thinning of the cortex of their brain. And the longer they'd been practicing, the less thinning was measured and observed. This research on the ways in which this practice of mindfulness, which really is a practice of paying attention, it really is an exercise in noticing in a very deliberate and intentional way, can bring about structural changes to the brain. And reflect on that for a moment. We now know that the brain changes in response to our experience. That's called neuroplasticity. And mindfulness has oftentimes been referred to as self-directed neuroplasticity. No one but you knows where your attention is for the most part, and you're the one who can shift and deliberately engage your attention or not. And so this self-directed neuroplasticity, which comes about through many things in life, but the mindfulness practice is one of them, has been found to be associated with some very, very important changes to the structure and function of the brain. Gyrification, the folds in the brain that you're probably familiar with. Research has found that the practice of mindfulness is associated with greater gyrification, which is associated with information processing and a quickening or a speeding up of the ability to process information. Research has been found to be, has found that the amygdala, a part of the brain that's oftentimes associated with fear and being reactive in a fearful way to what takes place around us, research has found that the practice of mindfulness has been associated with not just less activation of the amygdala, but also even perhaps a thinning of the structure of this part of the brain. In the areas of medical health, we have found that there's less inflammation, greater immune functioning, and even going to the level of our genetic code and the ways in which an aspect of our DNA, the very tips that are referred to as telomeres, which as we get older begin to fray, begin to shorten as an indicator of longevity, that the practice of mindfulness has been associated with the ability to rebuild or repair our telomeres. So it's very interesting what this seemingly innocuous practice of paying attention can bring about in areas that really matter, not to mention research on mindfulness and anxiety, mindfulness and depression, mindfulness and the ways in which we're able to experience many, many aspects of life in a more engaged, attentive, and fulfilled way. And so the research on mindfulness and the benefits it can have to those experiencing anxiety or mood fluctuations and depression is rather significant. Mindfulness can be practiced standing up, sitting down, walking, running, talking in court, mindfulness can be practiced at all times, anytime, although it can be more challenging when we're in the midst of doing stuff. And so the exercises that we'll do are those that will take place in perhaps a quieter environment in which we will sit down. I'll encourage you to sit down, although you can maintain any posture you'd like. I'm going to have a seat, which is the traditional posture for this practice. This exercise is one that we could call order in the cortex. You know, if we were in court and we were seeking order in the court, what would be called for? What would be helpful? Well, for people to be attentive, for people to be focused. And when people realized that their mind was wandering away, or when they were getting caught in an overactive, overengaged emotional state, they would be able to bring their attention back to what's really at play. So for this exercise, what's really at play is this body breathing. Of course, there's many things that are going on in this moment, and you can pay attention to anything you want as the object of your attention. But because this body and because this breath tend to follow us around, it's a very portable practice, and the breath tends to be one of the primary objects of attention for many practices. And so what we're going to do in the service of order in the cortex, right, the circuitry here, the neural circuit cortex, if you will, is to place our attention on an object, the breath, rest our attention on that object, which will change. The breath will flow in and flow out. There's a lot going on. Just because we've been breathing our entire life and will until the last breath we take, doesn't mean that it's to be taken for granted. And so really this is an opportunity to not take this breath for granted and to notice the nuance and the ways in which it influences the feeling, tone of the body. Perhaps you'll find it can be helpful to pay attention to this in the ways that we can start paying attention to other things. And so while we're paying attention to the breath, what will happen from time to time with the mind and the thoughts we're having? They will wander away. And when I say from time to time, I mean quite often. If you're able to keep your attention on the first 10 breaths that you take, you are probably more attentive than most people in this world. And so it doesn't matter how many times your mind wanders, that's not important. When you realize that your mind has wandered, you've just woken up. You're mindfully aware. And the instruction is to bring your attention back to the breath. So I'm going to guide us through a 5-minute practice. And this same instruction is one that you can do for 1 minute, for 5 minutes, for 10 minutes, for 20 minutes. While there are many variations on the mindfulness theme, and there's many different kinds of practices, this foundation level practice is one that will serve you well for many, many years in both shorter and longer forms. So we begin by bringing our posture upright, stable, alert, aware of the posture. This mindfulness is very much about our attention and the quality of awareness that we're bringing to our lives moment by moment. And so we're not just taking or assuming a posture that is upright and stable, but we are aware of that posture. As we lower or close our eyes, whichever you prefer, and bring your attention to the body sitting in the chair as you breathe. If your legs are crossed, you may wish to uncross them. You may want to place your hands on your lap or on your thighs. A posture that is dignified, though it can be whatever you wish. Allowing the breath to move through the body, allowing the belly to move with the breath, not by trying to breathe a certain way, but you just may notice when you place your attention on the body that the breathing is shallow, that the belly is taut. And in that noticing, something may shift. Aware of where your body is making contact with the chair, your bottom meeting the seat of the chair. Your back, perhaps, meeting the back of the chair as you breathe. The mind will wander. Yours may already have been wandering. Maybe you were aware. Maybe you weren't aware until I just said the mind may wander. When you notice your mind wandering, gently bring your attention back to the breath, waiting patiently for your return. Aware of the body, not just sitting, but moving with the breath. The rib cage expanding, the shoulders lifting, the belly expanding on the in-breath, and softening on the out-breath. If you feel like you're trying, you need not try. The body is breathing. You're being breathed. You're just noticing it. You're witnessing it. Breathing in, you know you're breathing in. Breathing out, you know you're breathing out. There's nothing you need to do in this moment. You may have thoughts of doing. Notice the thoughts arising and return to the breath. You may have a flash of a feeling as your mind turns in this direction or that. Notice the arising and changing of the feeling tone of these moments as they come and they go. Returning to the breath. Allowing this moment to be as it is, and yourself to be who you are. No more, no less. Aware of breathing, aware of the posture as you breathe. And when you're ready, in the next moment or two, with an awareness of doing so, to lift the gaze, open the eyes. So that is a mindfulness practice, about 5 minutes in length. And as you can tell, you can have that be longer or shorter. You are essentially assuming a posture that is upright and stable, not too rigid but not slouched. You're placing your attention on an object like the breath. It could be the body, the sensations in the body. When you notice your mind wandering, you're doing what? You're bringing your attention back. Again and again and again. And that's the exercise. And what you'll find, I think, in time, as many do, is you become more proficient at keeping your attention trained on an object. You become more alert to when it is that your mind wanders away. And you become more skillful at bringing your attention back to where you placed it originally, and ultimately to the task at hand. I'm now going to share with you an exercise called the learned hand exercise, which I think you'll find helpful in bringing a few moments of clarity and even calm into your busy day in all of 15 or 30 seconds. So, it's called the learned hand exercise. You may remember, of course, learned hand, the great jurist, very clear of mind, very articulate, very focused, and this is an exercise in the service of just that. We'll draw upon the breath and the movement of the body in an alignment which calls for your attention, calls for your concentration, calls for a mindful engagement to be able to do this exercise, even if it's for all of 15 or 30 seconds. And when all is said and done, it's an exercise that's meant not to be for more than a minute or two anyway. It looks like this. I'm going to describe it, then I'm going to practice it for you, and then I'm going to guide you through it. So we're going to inhale to the count of 4, hold our breath to the count of 7, and exhale to the count of 8. It's also known as the 4-7-8 exercise. 4-7-8 hands exercise. As we're inhaling to the count of 4, beginning with a lightly clenched fist, we're going to extend our fingers open to the count of 4, hold them open to the count of 7, and exhale to the count of 8. So we're inhaling and opening our fingers to the count of 4. We're holding our breath and keeping our fingers extended to the count of 7. And we're exhaling and returning our fingers to a lightly clenched fist to the count of 8. And we'll do that twice. Andrew Weil, a very prominent physician and leader in the world of integrative medicine, draws upon the breathing practice of 4-7-8 as being very helpful for working with anxiety and panic. And so I think you'll find this exercise in the breathing count to be helpful in that regard. Now notice that in a traditional mindfulness exercise, we're not trying to breathe in a particular way. So this is an exercise I'm sharing with you because it brings together a little bit of the calming quality of the ways that we can manipulate our breath with an awareness to what we're doing. So it looks like this. We start like this, and it looks like this. All right, so I'm inhaling to the count of 4, holding my breath to the count of 7, exhaling to the count of 8. If you're able to inhale through the nose and exhale through the mouth as if blowing through a straw, that's the way the exercise is oftentimes discussed, but it's whatever is most comfortable for you. So let me guide you through this exercise. I'm going to begin by saying 3, 2, 1, then I'm going to say open and inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold and stretch, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, exhale and close, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we'll do this once, and then we'll do this twice. So beginning with our hands in a lightly clenched fist, inhale and open, 2, 3, 4, stretch and hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, exhale and close, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then lower or close your eyes and rest your attention on the breath. And then we'll do this exercise one more time, but we'll do it twice. Know that when you do it on your own, you pick a pacing that works for you. The key is to keep the tempo the same across the exercise, but it can be slower or it can be faster as it is most effective for you. So, beginning with our hands in a lightly clenched fist, inhaling and opening our fingers, 2, 3, 4, stretch and hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, exhale and close, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale and open, 2, 3, 4, stretch and hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, exhale and close, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then lowering or closing the eyes and resting your attention on the breath. You may already notice some extent to which there's a calming quality to this exercise. Many find it to be so. And as you become more practiced in doing this exercise, as it becomes more second nature, I think you'll find that you can do it at work, you can do it in the courtroom, you can do it at a meeting. No one needs to know you're doing it. Your hands can be underneath the desk, your hands can be on the desk. It's the kind of thing that's very innocuous and yet can be very, very helpful. I'd also like to share one final exercise, which is known as STOP. The acronym STOP is the instruction. S stands for stop. T for take a breath, aware of the breath. The mindfulness practice isn't about taking the breath. We're doing that all the time. It's aware of the breath that we're taking. O is to observe what's taking place around you or what's taking place inside. And then P is to proceed. This is a wonderful exercise that can be done when you're driving and you reach a stop sign, and the stop sign is your reminder right there to practice, or it can be practiced anytime and anywhere you like. You might have a little sticky that you write stop on and put it somewhere, because this practice of mindfulness isn't so hard, but it's challenging at times, and we can forget. So this simple little exercise is one that's not even that challenging, but we can forget. So, reminder, we're going to stop, take a breath, aware of the breath, observe what's taking place around you, or notice the activity of the mind or the sensations in the body or the feeling tone of this moment, and then to proceed. And you might notice that that really is a truncated version of the mindfulness exercise proper, where you're pausing, you're stopping, you're taking breaths, aware of the breath, you're observing the activity of the mind and bringing your attention back, and then at some point the exercise ends. So STOP offers you the ability to practice mindfulness during the day when you reach a stop sign, or just whenever it is that you may realize it might be helpful to bring a little bit or a lot of mindful awareness, of an attentiveness, of an engaged quality of being present for this moment into your life. I very much enjoyed this time sharing a little bit about mindfulness with you, and I hope you have found it to be helpful and informative, and wish you all the best in life and law and in the ways in which you may develop a deeper understanding of the study and practice of mindfulness.